All right, everybody. Thank you guys for coming. This is, I think, our 4th Lean Startup Circle event. So, sorry, this mic's not working. Can you guys just hear me if I talk loud? Is that all good? All right, cool. Oh, all right, never mind. I'm just going to hold it up. Oh, yeah, we can do that. Okay, so thank you guys for coming. I'm Basil. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Lean Startup Circle. I think this is our 4th event since we started last December. So far, they've been going really good. So good to see some new faces and some people who were here at earlier ones. We're always looking for new ideas, and we did the survey earlier, and a lot of people mentioned they wanted to know how to grow their startup. So that's how we came up with the idea to do a Lean Startup Circle event on PR and press. So hopefully it's really useful for a lot of you guys. But before we jump into it, I'm going to hand it off to Hetty to talk a little bit about Pivotal Lab. So first of all, thanks Pivotal Lab for once again hosting us and the great food display. And here's Hetty.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for coming. I'm really excited to stick around for this event tonight. Pivotal Labs is especially excited about hosting this event because a lot of people, we're pretty new to the Boston area, actually. We just moved into this space in December. And a lot of people don't know that Pivotal does actually a lot of work with startups. So startups like Groupon, even Uber or the Not.com, those are all people that we've worked with. So there's a couple of times where it really makes sense to look at Pivotal when you're a startup and like work with Pivotal. So some of the times that really make sense are when you are looking to deliver some software on day one. So if you're looking to build something and you don't have anyone to build it and you want to get something out there that's working and working software and not a prototype, then you want to talk to us. And another reason is when you're looking to build a scalable team. So if you are at the point where your startup is actually thinking about scale, which I have a feeling a lot of the people in this room are, you might want to talk to me and learn a little bit more about the ways we can help build a scalable team. So we actually have a client, so I'm just going to, like in the room that's hanging out, so I'm just going to point him out, John. If you want to hear about, he just worked with us recently, and if you want to hear horror stories about working with us, then you can talk to him. And otherwise, I'll be over at the table if you want to learn a little bit more after the event. So thank you guys for being here.
All right, thanks a lot, Hetty. All right, so let's get going. So we have here Katie from VentureFizz. Her Twitter handle is KAITE ROSA. With obviously the @ before that. And then Olivia from BostInno, who's at Olivia_VANNI. So thanks you guys for coming. And let's just get started with, if you guys could just, to begin, tell us a little bit about your career and how you guys ended up writing about tech. Let's start.
So thank you for the introduction. As Basil mentioned, I'm Katie Rosa, and I'm Director of Content and Marketing at VentureFizz. If you're not familiar with VentureFizz, we're an online publication covering tech, entrepreneurship, and career inspiration here in the Boston area. So all of our content is specific to Boston. And I've been with VentureFizz for going on 6 months now. Previously, I was with Virgin Pulse, a health tech startup out in Framingham, where I was doing marketing communications in-house. So much more on the brand side than on the journalism side. And prior to that, I was with Lionbridge, a language and translation company, and at Brafton, which Olivia and I both have that on our resume. So Brafton Content Marketing Agency here in Boston, where I was both on the client side and on the news side, the journalism side, covering small business marketing.
Thank you. I'm Olivia. I am an on-staff writer at BostInno, which covers innovation and startup activity throughout the Boston area. I've been there for about 9 months, going on 10 months now. Prior to that, I was doing enterprise software as a service sales for NetSuite, but my territory was sub 100 employee companies in software in Boston, New York, and DC, so essentially startups along the East Coast. And before that, I was at Brafton, and I also was a ghostwriter for a lot of local startups.
All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. So we'll just jump right into some of the questions that we think will be most useful. So just first of all, how do you guys decide what to write about? Do you guys get a lot of inbound things, or are you guys going out and looking, or is it a mixture of the two, and how do you pick through all the companies?
Sure. Most of the content that I'm covering is coming to me very opportunistically, I'd say. So it's either within conversations, I'm hearing interesting stories. We really try to stick to more of the human interest angle rather than breaking news. So when I'm speaking with people, I'm asking, what's your founder doing? What's their background? How did they get to where they are? What's their story? What's different and unique about your business? We are getting pitched as well, so some of our opportunities come from that. And sometimes it's just someone, who has an interesting business or an interesting story coming up to us and saying, here's our story, will you cover it?
I would say it's pretty much very similar to the process that you just discussed. For me, I personally love being out in the community prior to the crutches, but I'm always at events. I come across a lot of local entrepreneurs that way. A lot of pitch contests. That way it's even better because then I can know exactly what they're about when I go to reach out to them. I also get a ton of inbound pitches. My inbox is insane. I know at least some people here I can see I've not responded to their emails today. So I think also beside that, I go on AngelList. I look at connections of connections. I have a lot of introductions. People who start to form rapport with me, introduce a lot of people. So really it's getting to know who to know within Boston to kind of get into our publication and really stand out.
Awesome. And then I guess going off that, so it seems like a lot of it is a human element and looking at a story for the founders. Are there trends you look for, like within the companies themselves, or is it what do you kind of look for, like a pivot or a history of the founder, or just how they came up with the idea?
I don't think it's necessarily trends because everybody's story is really unique to them 9 times out of 10. I think a lot of it comes to how they are presenting it to us. So if it's within a conversation, usually people are kind of seeding different ideas of what their angle might be, and that can be very helpful. But in terms of specific trends, I don't think that there's really one that's specific for us.
I think for us, really, it's going to sound like a smart-ass answer, but we look for what's newsworthy. What kind of traction are you guys getting? Did you get a ton of users? Are you ready to launch? Are you coming out of stealth? Really what you have going for you, investment. When people are pitching, usually they do throw that out. In addition to that, we'd like to look to see what the backstory is about startups, to know about the founders, their journey. That's really what our readers love hearing about, so we're also going to dig up on that.
And I think going off of that, it's for us, it's also a lot about what is different and unique that a publication that might cover breaking news wouldn't report on, and we're more likely to cover that angle. If someone's just like, "Hey, my startup just launched, a new app," I'm more often than not going to be like, thanks, but no thanks. There's not really the interesting, unique, relevant. I don't want to say necessarily newsworthy in our approach, because what might be newsworthy to BostInno could be very, very different for us. But if there is that, again, that human interest, unique angle to it, and I'm more likely to pick up on that than something else.
Cool. And then going off that, you mentioned that, which seems kind of obvious, but some people might not notice right away, that different publications might latch on to kind of different things. Do you guys have any tips on, maybe it's, a real simple answer, but kind of on figuring out what stage you're at, what's newsworthy for you, what good publications you should be reaching out to as a startup?
Thinking on it as well. I think, can you maybe repeat it?
Yeah, just so you mentioned that what might be newsworthy for one publication might not be newsworthy for another publication. So do you have any tips on, as a startup looking to get press, how they kind of make the list of who they should be reaching out to with whatever their story is?
I don't know so much as how they should make their list, but I think make sure that what you're pitching to one customize your pitch, basically. Don't pitch the same thing to Olivia that you're going to pitch to me, because A, we're not going to want to cover the exact same story, and B, what is relevant for BostInno is not necessarily, or any other publication, is not necessarily going to be relevant for my publication. So if something comes across my inbox that is not a fit for our publication, but someone's able, or it doesn't feel like an immediate fit for our publication, but someone's able to say, point out what the relevant angle might be, the interesting angle, the human interest aspect of it, I'm more likely to kind of at least engage in a conversation and see what we could do with that. But I think, when you get a templated press release that's mass emailed, to 1,000 different publications, it's a lot easier to pass on those than if it's an actual engaging conversation with people.
I agree with that, and I think even on a more granular level, you want to also really study individual writers throughout a publication. So not only do publications differ from one another, but writers themselves do. I think that one of the best pieces of advice that I can give is look at your competitors, look at people who are adjacent to you in your space, see who's writing about those people, start putting them on a list, and those are the people you're going to want to reach out to. Because chances are, if they've written about it one time, if you can find a unique angle about what makes you different and why they want to talk about it and pitch it to them, they're probably going to bite.
And along that vein as well, I'd say also if you're able to, like, poke around what someone's individually interested in. I know that, I have a health and wellness background. If someone comes to me with an interesting startup, an interesting story that also happens to have something that I'm personally going to enjoy covering and writing about, I'm probably, more likely to say, oh, sure, let's at least have a conversation.
Cool, thanks again. Awesome. So you mentioned kind of, you don't just want the standard press release. So this might be just a one-word answer, but the feedback I've always got is press releases are not useful. Do you kind of agree that as a startup, you shouldn't be working on those too much?
Do you have an immediate answer yet?
I do have an immediate answer. Press releases, I would say 99% of the time, especially if I can tell it's like not an exclusive, I'm going to pass on it probably. If it's not an exclusive and not an embargo, chances are there's nothing unique there. Maybe if you offer an interview, just so that somebody can get some extra color within the piece and make it a little bit more unique, but we're not going to run canned quotes from a press release. Oh, yes, absolutely. And actually, this is something that is really, really useful, and I come across it so many times that startups, especially if they don't have a marketing person on staff, which is usually the last thing, they don't know how to use embargoes or exclusives. So basic definition, exclusive is you're offering that piece to one publication and one publication only. If they accept it, then you give them the information. If they pass, then you can go on, and that exclusive is broken, and you can send it out to whomever you feel you want it to have that information. An embargo is when you are sending out a press release or some bit of information and you do not want it posted before a certain time. In that case, you want to reach out to people and say, hey, I have some information, can't really tell you much about it, it's kind of along these lines, will you honor an embargo for this date at this time? Making sure to put in the time zones in there, because that can be tricky. That once people agree to those, then you can send information. If they don't agree, don't send them information, because basically it's a verbal pact saying that, or even a written pact, that they're not going to disclose any information that you have timed before it's supposed to be out there. I hope that is okay.
For me, I would kind of agree that 99% of the time I'm going to pass on a press release. However, I think a lot of that is dependent on the relationship that I have with that person. If it's just a mass email, I'm going probably to pass on it and may not necessarily reply. If it's from like Valentine from OpenBay, if she's the contact at OpenBay, and if she's sending it to me personally, I have a relationship with her, I might say, hey, I'm going to pass on this story, but here's what I found interesting from that press release. How can we expand on it? And at least we're open to conversation a little bit more. There's some contacts who I'll get press releases from that are very specific to here's what the VentureFizz angle can be based off of what you've recently been publishing, and I find that helpful. But it's rare to get releases like that. So like Olivia said, I think 99% of the time it's pretty easy to pass on a blanket press release. And a press release is never anything that we would run. We would always do a unique article. It may not even be about what the release is covering.
Great. So another question from my personal background is when my company first got into an accelerator, we started getting a lot of emails from PR agencies who specialize in startups and got a lot of kind of mixed feedback from that when we run around and ask people. So I'd love to kind of hear how you guys view those PR agencies. Are they good relationships? Do you think they're good investments for startups?
I think it depends on what your goal is. And who you're working with. I mean, if you're a tech startup here in Boston and you're working with a niche agency that's only covering, tech in Boston, then yes, you're probably going to be able to build the right relationships. But if you're working with not to throw Ogilvy under the bus, but an agency like Ogilvy, it's probably going to be a very different experience. So I think you just need to make sure that your PR and marketing strategy, are married, and that you are working with someone who can help you further whatever your goals happen to be. So it's really, I don't think there's any straight answer to that.
I think it really depends on the PR person that you're working with. I think I would suggest that you would reach out to some people and ask them, who do you think is a good person to work with on the local level? If you're going for national, like try to see who's a good name there. I cannot tell you how many emails I get that are just pure spam, and I think it's really doing a lot of companies a disservice. For the most part, they're sending out template emails, they're blasting everybody, very much cut and dry. There's nothing customized, and it might not even be the right person. And I think that especially if you're paying for that service, like you could do your own work at that point. So I think that you should, if you are going to make that investment, you should talk to some people within press and within, maybe other startups who have used some PR people and see what's worked for them and who are some good people who are trustworthy to do that.
And I think it's also worth noting that the value you can get from a PR agency isn't strictly, isn't always related to getting your company in the news. I mean, media training, if you're not a marketing or sales professional or have that background, media training is so helpful, especially if you're used to being behind the scenes. They can help you refine your pitch. They can help you define your key messages for your company, and especially if you are open and willing to get your PR and your marketing teams on the same table, I think that's a huge advantage. So it really is dependent on what your goals are. And I think, to Olivia's point, investigate who you are going to work with, ask for recommendations, and make sure that whoever you're interested in working with has the appropriate contacts that you're looking to build.
Cool. Okay, so let's say you're fortunate enough to get some press. Some people wrote about you. Do you guys have any tips? And this one's a pretty broad question, but any tips for how to best leverage that press? So do you think when you see a piece go viral or mini viral, do you think a lot of it is kind of in addition to how good the piece is and how good the story is, what the company itself did to spread that? Or do you think it's mainly just the piece itself?
I think it's a combination of both. I've seen really great pieces go under the radar, and I've seen mediocre pieces get a lot of attention. I think you should arm your employees at your company with the necessary tools to share that, and I don't mean by tools, I mean, give them templated templated tweets and templated LinkedIn messages and encourage them to share that across the board. And you may get 500 people, or not 500 if you're a startup, most likely, maybe like 20 employees sharing the same tweet, but that definitely helps increase its visibility. Give them images that can go with it, social images, help them figure out how to best share it within their various networks on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram. So I think a lot of it is about arming your cheerleaders, essentially, and giving them what they need so that they can help you get the word out there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, the hard work is done at that point. You have the press. I think we've had so many cases too where it's like an amazing piece and somehow it just doesn't fall, go to the extent that it should be going to. So I think that you should definitely be sharing it socially, sending it to your family, your friends, having them share it. Obviously, we're going to go to every mile possible to share it within our network, and we even email it to people to share it. And so it's a group effort.
I think also, I mean, one very specific thing that we used to do in a previous role when I was in house was any time that we got coverage, every Friday or maybe it would have been every Monday, we would send out an alert to our internal team and all of our supporters saying, here's all the coverage we received. Click here to tweet it, like make it as simple and as foolproof as possible to help your employees and your team and your collaborators share your content.
Great. Do you guys have, and it's okay if you don't, but do you have any, can you remember any companies who did a really good job of this, or off the top of your head? You can? All right, great.
So today, actually, Log Me In, we did an office tour on them, and they clearly shared it with their employees, and everybody was tweeting about it. We have a contributor that's from Smashfly, and they send it out clearly to their entire employee population and get them to tweet about the different pieces that they're posting. And recently I did an interview with the CMO over at the Grommet, and they got all of their employees, and I think that they're like a team of 30 or so, and that was one of the, I saw more coverage on that piece than a lot of the others because the team was so active in sharing it across social networks.
I feel like it's almost cheating, but Wayfair and HubSpot, obviously pretty big companies here. I mean, with that too, I kind of want to say this with a grain of salt. Those are enormous fixtures within our Boston community in terms of tech. People want to know about them anyway. So regardless of how many employees that they have, which is substantially more than say an early stage startup, but just two examples.
Cool. Another thing a lot of people do, which I think at first some people kind of marry together with press, even though they are very different, is a lot of startups have blogs, right? Do you feel that, how can a startup that is getting a lot of visitors to their blog kind of marry that with press where you're still you want to still keep something for you guys to write about that is not already in your blog? No one's just going to point to the blog. Have you seen any good examples of kind of marrying the two?
I think that you shouldn't necessarily have your blog feature the same type of content that you would pitch to the press and have the press cover. I think you're far better off to have your blog be more thought leadership on whatever industry you're in than for it to be like, hey, here's the cool thing our company is doing, because no one is going to really care about that. Like at the end of the day, you're going to get a lot more followers and visitors to your blog if you're offering interesting, relevant advice with actionable takeaways that your readers can say, okay, I can go and do X, Y, and Z to advance my role, my industry, my company, whatever it may be.
Absolutely. I think that there is definitely a difference. And even with that, I mean, you still have some publications who will publish thought leadership pieces. So I would say, really prioritize. You should make your own editorial calendar, know what's coming up in your company for events or milestones, mark those for, the ones to share with the press, and then also plan out more of your thought leadership or culture sort of pieces to really build up your blog.
Thanks. Okay, so we are the Boston Lean Startup Circle. And you guys are both writers in Boston. So when you think of Boston startups, is there anything you think that is different about companies in Boston or Boston in particular versus other cities?
I think, and I don't think this is necessarily specific to startups. I think this is specific to the type of people that Boston attracts, but most of us are pretty scrappy, right? And I mean, granted, I have not written about startups on the West Coast or other locations, and I haven't worked there, so I don't have my own personal experience. But I think that that's one thing that seems very unique to Boston is that we we have a hustle, and we don't just have it in the startup scene. We have it in our sports teams. We have it, in tons of different industries, and I think that that's something that makes Boston unique and interesting.
So 1776, an incubator down in DC, recently published some rankings, and they actually said that Boston was #1 city in the US for fostering entrepreneurship. And the reasons that they listed are all things that I encounter on a day-to-day basis. We have a smart group of people. We are honored enough to have some world-renowned universities, and a lot of the talent links through, seems through into the community, and also just in general, the universities seem to support us quite a bit, and with that too, just our sense of community. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I sit down at an interview and they say to me, I really have to point out that this entrepreneur, this VC, this organization, this incubator, this accelerator program, they helped me get to where I am now. We are very collaborative, we're competitive, but we're not cutthroat. And I can't tell you also how many people then say, and I feel this sense of indebtedness that now I have to go and give back and do the same. So I think that that's what differentiates us. We're not out in the valley where the community is actually blocking Google buses and trying to prevent people from going to work. We want our tech community to thrive.
Great. And continuing on the Boston theme, who do you kind of think of when you think of like some cool up-and-coming Boston startups?
I don't think this will be a surprise, but Lola. I think Lola what they're doing is really interesting, and I'm excited to see where they take that, especially knowing about the success of Kayak and what that's come to be. And I think there's a lot of potential there, and it'll be interesting to see in another few more months and another year what's happened there.
We're Boston, so I have to say a med tech company. Astrius Technologies, they are linked to Harvard and MIT, and they have cleaned up on all the pitch circuits in the city. They won the MIT 100K, the Harvard New Venture competition. They are just doing amazing stuff. They have developed a little card that's super inexpensive that can actually detect lung cancer on your breath. So I'm expecting great things for them. And also VirtueDent is another startup that I really think is going to go far. They were in this last cohort at Mass Challenge. They're doing telemedicine for dentistry, which is something that I think a lot of us need. And Hitesh over there, the founder, he is just a fighter. So I expect a lot of good things from him.
Awesome. So circling back, you guys mentioned a lot about relationships, and that's a good way to kind of, you guys want to write about someone who you know and you have a relationship with. What are the best ways for a startup to start building those relationships that is not just clearly spammy and tweeting at you every day for 2 weeks?
I have a story about someone who's actually in the room, Louie from BotKeeper over there. I work in WeWork, and I usually position myself right on the 8th floor, which is like the common floor in WeWork, to have conversations with people, to have real life interaction. And one day, Louie came up to me and he said, "Hey, I work at BotKeeper. This is what we do. This is what's interesting and what you might want to cover. What'd you think about it?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever." And then he was like, "Oh, and by the way, here are 15 other introductions I would love to make with you for people who are in this space who you haven't yet covered, and I think would have an interesting story for you." You are never going to get an interaction like that via email, at least not to start off, and especially a cold email. And I think that is another aspect of the Boston startup scene that is pretty unique, is how interwoven the community is. So really jump on that. Go to the events, talk to people in person, make the right connections, ask for the introductions, and be as real as you possibly can with it. Twitter too, also I think is good. I'm sure the same goes for Olivia. Like, we're not, sometimes it can be difficult to monitor all of your various alerts, but I had a startup reach out to me on Twitter a few weeks ago that I had been interested in covering, hadn't really gotten around to doing it yet, and she said, "Hey, would you cover us? I think we'd be a good fit for your audience," and that's kind of where the conversation started.
In person, I think is just the absolute best way to really shine through. I tell a lot of people this, but it's so easy for me to ignore emails. When you are in person, it is very much socially unacceptable to just walk away from someone. I'm not saying that you should corner someone and, just occupy their time for an entire event, but definitely if you know somebody's there, go over, introduce yourself, slip them your card, and and then send a follow-up email. You met me here. I think also for me, LinkedIn is pretty key, only because no one uses it. So when I get a message on LinkedIn, it really comes to my attention. I'm not sorting through the God knows how many thousands of emails that I have in my inbox right now. I have like maybe 4 or 5.
And see, I would say the opposite about LinkedIn on my end. Like, I think I am getting, especially lately, a lot of like pitches via LinkedIn, and it's so easy because it's not in my inbox for me to just kind of gloss over it or like let that little alert just sit there. So I think it's also like make sure like talk to people, ask what's the best way to pitch a story to you. Olivia will tell you LinkedIn, and I'll say email or find me on Twitter or whatever. So.
Cool. So I have a few more questions, but I know you guys are probably a little sick of hearing my voice. So I wanted to open it up to see if any of you guys had questions. Start with you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for this information. So here's a specific example, and I'd be interested in your insights, and perhaps it's beneficial to everyone here. So we're working with a couple of university professors in marketing to develop a case study. Each one of them is developing a different case study with actual customers of ours to construct a model of their own, and hopefully using our tools, and hopefully whatever the outcome of their results, they'll be writing about it. So let's say they did these are academics in marketing. So I imagine they'll be publishing this in academic journals. How do we leverage this for we're targeting businesses, not academic institutions, and what's your insight about this? Thanks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I think obviously your case studies are going to have a story coming out of them, right? It may come across in an academic nature given who the writers are on these pieces, but pay attention to what those stories are and what is unique about these companies' approaches, and position it that way to journalists and to different publications. I think also whatever the key lessons are from these different companies is something that you could probably develop into a story as well.
I think that would come back again to, know your writers, know your publications. I have definitely, dealing with a lot of universities, I've written stuff from reports or from articles, academic articles. In this case, if it's marketing, see who writes about marketing. That's not gonna, I don't think that in any way is going to deter people. You might want to make it a little bit more digestible. And obviously, have those conclusions right off the bat with a pitch, just so they don't have to go through an entire academic paper. But that would be my suggestion.
I'd also pay attention to what publications accept contributions from writers, because it could very well be that you work on a pitch or you work on an angle with the various writers. Like VentureFizz, we do occasionally accept guest contributions. I would work directly with whoever is going to be contributing a piece to develop the angle and the story, and really make sure that it's appropriate for our audience, but also getting the points that they want to convey across. So I think that there could definitely be some opportunity given what you're covering there.
Thank you for the question and the answers. Does anyone else have any right now? Yes.
At what stage is it most useful for a company to do their big PR push? Is it always? Is it right when product launch? What's been most successful for the companies you cover?
I I think that it really depends. I mean, you can reach out to the press right away and try to form a rapport before you're even launching. Like, you know, you could be very early stage and just say, hey, just so you know, we're like, keep us in mind. Maybe give them a timeline so that they can prioritize when to chat with you versus people who have something more pressing. But I don't think if there's any milestone, I don't think that it's not a bad time. You know, if you're just sitting there and nothing's happening, like maybe not the best time, but if you have a story, then, you know, reach out then.
And I would echo that. And I think, you know, going back to this is a lot about relationships. So don't miss an opportunity to build a relationship with the press. Continue that, and it doesn't what at least for VentureFizz, what we're covering may not always be around a major recently announced milestone. It could just be that, hey, you have a really cool backstory, and I want to hear more about it and see if it's a fit for my audience. So I think keep the lines of communication open all the time.
Yeah, and just real quickly, if you guys could list kind of some things you guys consider milestones, because it's the obvious one is obviously raising money, but there's some other ones that also count.
I would say, you know, coming out of stealth, launching, even a beta, if you're having an open beta, that's a good time to talk. Yeah, investors, obviously. Partnerships, major partnerships are pretty big. I mean, even the opposite, shuttering, that's good to know too. When a company is going under and I wish that on none of you. But that's also news, and you know, people learn from other entrepreneurs' journeys.
I think also major hires, if you're doing major restructuring, rebranding if it's for like an interesting and relevant reason. If it's just that you wanted to choose a new color palette, probably not very newsworthy. I don't think most companies are rebranding, you know, with strictly a color palette in mind. I feel like that kind of covers it.
Also, any cool marketing stunts. Like I've had people with puppies and all that kind of fun stuff. And if you're doing something like that, you know, is just kind of, you know, fun and interesting, then I think people will bite on that.
Also, company culture, if there's anything like really cool that you're doing with your employees, that's something that I know we personally would be interested in learning more about. If you're giving back to the community in a big way, again, I think it really is, it really depends on what you're doing and what the interesting angle for the story might be. But I think those are some of the big ones.
I'll bring this over to you.
So how do you guys rate your own stories? I mean, obviously, the number is an easy way to do it, right? So how many times it's been read or how many times the page has been hit. But is there an impact factor that you could use saying, these of my stories were great, I had fun writing it, or they had the most difference to the community?
Thank you. Either one of you want to start?
I think metrics in any industry those are difficult. I mean, you could be a sales rep and you're absolutely busting your ass and your numbers aren't there. So sometimes that happens too. In our case, you know, there will be stories that we pour our hearts and souls into that have really like impactful, even on the national level, you know, importance. But unfortunately, that doesn't really factor into our numbers. A lot of it is not just page views, but also shares. We call them unique visits, so any interactions that people have with it, emailing it, chatting it to someone, sharing it on Facebook, things like that. That's what we track.
And in addition to, we track all of that as well. In addition, I think a big number for us is also time on site. Are people actually, you know, they may be visiting it. How much are they actually reading it? Are they getting through the entire piece? That's I think a big one. And I think it tells you a lot too, right? I think Olivia covered the rest of them though.
Thanks. All right, next question over here.
Hi, I'm Hanson from ThinkBoard. You actually wrote about me in March. Thank you. I was curious, do you guys prefer to write about the same startup and journey over time, or do you prefer to write about new startups constantly?
I think for me to cover it more than once, there would have to be something very interesting going on. Occasionally, maybe I would have profiled a founder, and next time I write about it, it would be, you know, a completely different angle, not about one specific person, but about the company itself. But it's rare, especially because I'm not covering breaking news, for me to continuously write about the same company over and over in every kind of milestone that they hit. Unless, again, it was like a major milestone. It really depends on the situation, though. I don't have like a cut and paste answer for that question.
I would say, for the most part, I mean, it's kind of what you were talking about. I think it depends on the company. If it's a huge company that always has something going on, absolutely. It depends on the milestone. So, for example, you know, you had 2 consecutive competitions that you won, you know, one after another. First one, amazing, because, you know, it's something that it's something recent and it's some traction. Second one, maybe not so much because it's kind of a little too similar. You know, so I think we like to follow entrepreneurs and startups throughout their journey. They're just in general, like, we love to follow up, and if there is something like notable going on, absolutely. If it's kind of the same thing, we'd probably pass on that.
Here you go.
Thank you. I've seen a lot of PR companies jumping into the crowdfunding boat, so to speak. And I'm wondering how has that affected what you do, and any comments would be really important for me regarding that, and I think for everybody, crowdfunding in general. Does that make sense? In other words, crowdfunding, anybody that's starting a crowdfunding campaign, whether it's reward crowdfunding or investors investing crowdfunding, needs to deal with PR companies, and usually the ones that are very good at doing that and get the media's attention, do very well. The ones that don't, then they flounder. Nothing happens to them. So what experiences have you had with that? Do you get a lot of spam mail, email from PR companies that are doing crowdfunding campaigns and so on?
Thank you.
So just to be clear, you're talking about PR firms that are pitching about crowdfunding campaigns. Okay. Exactly. So I would say I am on Kickstarter myself. I'm on Indiegogo. I'm on change.org. I look at those myself. It depends on the campaign, as in any situation. I would say the press is looking. So at least at BostInno, that's something that we definitely keep an eye on. So I wouldn't specifically go out to get a PR firm so that you're successful on that campaign. I don't think that. I think the press will, they'll see you and they'll cover you if that's the case.
I'm meaning more like PR companies coming to you, just like.
Right. I've never had that happen where a PR company has come to me about a crowdsourcing campaign. And in general, I don't think I would need that to happen.
Yeah, I would agree. I think anytime I've covered anything that was like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, it's always been a personal outreach, or it's something that I've seen and I'm like, hey, this is interesting, let's cover it. But I don't think I've ever gotten a pitch from a PR agency about it.
You.
The most of your publications, are they coming from you digging out something, or it's mostly people are sending you information and they feed you? That's my question. Thank you.
Sure. So I think it's definitely a mixture of both. It's people are sending stuff. It's built, like we said earlier, like through those relationships. I think that's the most important. The most important factor is the relationship, and someone, as Olivia said, has researched the publication and the individual writer that they're reaching out to, and has really refined their pitch or their story for that specific publication and that writer.
Right, it's a mixed bag. So we have feelers out there everywhere, but we do have people coming to us a lot And I wouldn't say that one is prioritized versus the other. I think that what really matters is what grabs us, and it can really come from anywhere.
Yeah, so the best story will rise to the top. Wherever you find it's not as important.
I would say I think it's easier to. The reason I keep stressing relationships is it's easier to break through the noise of the number of pitches that we're inundated with when you know who's sending it or who's calling you.
Yeah, just to add to that, one amazing strategy is not even pitch, just ask someone to coffee. Like just to chat. Let's grab a coffee, let's grab a drink, and people respond to that. Obviously with some journalistic integrity stuff where I can't really pay for them, but people, we're in this profession, we're in this profession because we like people and we like chatting and hearing people's stories. If we get an offer like that versus, hey, here's a page-long pitch that you have to read through, chances are we're going to take the coffee.
Actually, going off of that, a really good example that Valentine had done, and the reason that she and I have a connection is when I had first started at VentureFizz, saw that I was new, and she swung by my office and brought snacks and just had a conversation. It was very informal. It was, just to get to know you almost. And oh, by the way, here are a couple of interesting things that we're doing, and it just helped to build a rapport.
Thanks. Okay. We probably have time for 3 to 4 more questions.
So what social media platforms do you guys see getting the most traction? And for like PR articles or things that get written up, what should startups focus on as far as kind of pushing that content out?
Start with Olivia.
I feel like I keep on saying this, but it depends on the piece. No, it really depends. Facebook is very strong for consumer focused articles, culture, things with, just has more like that consumer appeal to it. Twitter otherwise is really, really good. Obviously you want to work on building an audience. That's how it gets out there. Instagram is big among the youths these days. And obviously, you can have some sort of article. I've seen this before where people will, they'll take a picture, maybe like a screen grab of it, and then they'll put the link in the bio of their Instagram page.
And I think also if you're marketing professionals, which I know you are, LinkedIn is huge. Don't miss out on the opportunities there. I think that, it certainly doesn't hurt if you're posting your own thought leadership on Medium. It's definitely one. A lot of brands are breaking into Snapchat as well. My best advice is find 1 or 2 and do it well. Don't go an inch deep and a mile wide, because that will kill your strategy, and it will sacrifice your content, I think. So.
Cool, thanks. We got a few. I'll get you next.
Hi. If we follow your good advice and we're lucky enough to have you want to write about us, can you talk a little bit like what's the intensity of the research process? Is it like one interview with one person? Do you try to interview everyone that you can? How much time do you have to do all this? Do you do product demos? Like what kind of stuff do you do?
Thank you.
I think it depends. I know we keep saying it depends on the piece, but it really does. Often for me, it's a conversation or a meeting, probably about an hour to an hour and a half total of an individual's time. I do a lot of my research on my own. Sometimes there might be a PR or marketing contact who I can kind of vet different aspects of the article with. I certainly am not sitting down with like the entire board or the entire C-suite of a company. It's usually one individual, and then doing my own research thereafter. I think the commitment on the company's end or the individual's end is usually pretty low.
I think that usually, I would advise that one person really take the reins and decide that they're going to be the press contact. I think that you can have the rest of your team on and there, but one person really being the voice of your company is best. I think that on my part, I'm kind of creepy. I really put a lot of research into it before I even sit down with somebody, so I know a lot about what's happened. You know, a lot about your journey, a lot about you as a founder. Now you want to switch your Facebook to private mode. So I'm going into that conversation prepared and knowing what I want for an angle. And I would advise that on your side, as a team, you guys should meet and discuss what it is that's really important. You know, get your story straight. I've had times where people have, you know, we published and then they come back and they say, oh, actually, I talked to my founder and we want to say this instead. And that's really difficult. When it's published. So I would advise, yeah, definitely on your end, like doing some due diligence, and then probably the interview, they usually last half hour to an hour and a half, depending on the topic. But be at the ready and know what you want to convey.
Completely agreed. And I think that this is where some of the advice that Olivia just offered is where getting media training with a PR agency or a consultant or whatever can be very helpful. It's definitely difficult to try and sit down and make sense of a story when there are two people, even if it's two people telling the same story, but just trying to get everyone on board. It can also, I think, detract from the overall point if there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Hi, I'm Angelique from Lighter. I just want to know that when you're being pitched or just even in a conversation, do you find it useful or helpful to hear about the other publications that the company was featured in, or do you find it off-putting? Do you think that we should kind of be giving you everything that you can use to make your decision, or would you rather go and do the research, and if it's big enough, you'll find it easily on Google?
I think, like Olivia just said, we definitely come to our meetings with a lot of, already having done a lot of our research. I think that's the mark of a good writer and a good journalist. I would, and I go to venture to guess that Olivia's probably going to agree with this. If I know that another publication has already written on you, I'm probably going to pass. Especially if it was recent, you know, if Olivia just wrote about your publication, I'm not going to go and do the same article 2 weeks later. It would have to be a very different story from what another publication has covered for me.
I think I agree with that. I think at least on the local level, we pride ourselves in being the person who gets there first and has the first exposure. I don't think, though, you should really view that as a negative. I wouldn't highlight that as like, hey, these people have written about us, so you should too. If you are going to use that strategy, you might say like, this is what happened, but since then, this is what we have to tell, or hey, we didn't tell them this. I think this would be a good angle for you to pursue. So give them a reason why they should still write about you.
And I think we have time for one last question. Or maybe two more if anyone else has.
Yeah, I would like to thank you guys for the enormous knowledge you've given us today. I just want to ask if you guys have any customized icebreaker based on the medium of contact. Customized icebreaker. If I meet you on the street, what should I start with?
Any icebreakers?
That could be a good article. I don't. Do you have an answer to this? Because I don't have one off the top of my head.
What not to say? So many things not to say. No, I mean, I think just introducing yourself. You know, just say who you are. Explain why you're, you know, coming up to us, not that you're just accosting us. I mean, yeah, do yourself, like, I think it's really, really important for people, and this might be my sales background, like, dictating this, but I think it's really important that you get, like, an elevator pitch down. You really should. If you have the opportunity to go talk to somebody, I think pitch contests are wonderful, but they sometimes are detrimental in that the entire time, like they're way too long, and you're talking about yourself the entire time. If you know you're going to meet somebody, just be like, hey, this is who I am, this is why you want to talk to us, and then leave it be. I think getting that down is a skill that's really amazing.
I agree. And along the vein of like what not to do, I often get people, I think some people know now that we do a lot of profiles, and so they'll come up and they'll tell me their entire life story in like 30 seconds or 5 minutes. I think that goes back to Olivia's point of getting a pitch down and kind of going from there, and let it be organic, let it be natural. You know, like don't try to force something that down someone else's throat, and let a relationship grow from it. And what you're looking for will probably come from that if it's a good relationship.
I mean, obviously Twitter is super short, so yeah, that'd be a little bit different, but yeah, exactly, super pitch. But I think in general, you want to keep it short and sweet. I think I view most of my pitches on my phone. So if you think about what I'm viewing, even though it's a behemoth of a phone, you want to keep it pretty short. But in terms also of something not to do, and I just blanked. Oh, going up to certain journalists, I think you really should know the ecosystem also within the press world. Going up, someone went up to me and was like, "Oh, hi, yeah. So I just talked to Scott Kirshner, like who works with you." I'm like, "No, that's Beta Boston, but thanks for letting me know that you're doing an article with him." So I think that it's really important that you know the landscape too before you approach somebody.
And I think when it comes to the emails, I completely agree. Keep it short and sweet, and give me a subject line worth opening, and that's different and going to stand out from the 18 million other, emails. I just completely blanked on what my next point was too. So.
Awesome. And then just to end with one last question, are there any resources in Boston or just in general that you think startups should look for that might be underused? As far as press and getting press. All right. Well, anyway, thank you. Thank you guys for coming. It was great. And thank you guys all for coming. We're always thinking of new events, so if anyone has any ideas or anything that they think would be useful for us, feel free to just shoot me an email. You can email Basel, B-A-S-E-L, @userinterviews.com. And once again, we'll have some new events coming up this summer.